as the moderator. My name is Julia Shanks, and my talk is Financial Modeling for Risk Assessment. That's me. I'm a former chef. I love food. I now work with farmers doing financial management and business education. My goal is to help farmers be financially sustainable. Obviously, the scientists here are doing the great work to help that farming is sustainable, and I'm working on the financial side. I'm the author of The Farmer's Office, which is a business book for farmers, and the second edition is coming out in February, so don't buy a copy yet. Wait till February. There we go. So Dr. Punk, I very much appreciate, said climate change is fact. It's not a debate anymore. And I wanted to share some examples of the climate change challenges that we're having in Massachusetts, where I'm from, in the United States. This is a farm I worked with. We had disastrous flooding in July this year, and this is the crops that are just after the floods receded and just covered in silt. This is a farm in Vermont. This is the aerial view. You can see the water coming up halfway up the side of the barn. And in Massachusetts, where I'm from, 3,000 acres of crops were affected, costing over $15 million in lost revenue for the farmers. And that was just in Massachusetts. So as we've shared, the economic pain is real as well. So I want to talk about how farmers can adjust to their crop plans and help mitigate the risk of the unknown weather patterns. Before I do that, I just wanted to talk about mitigation versus adaptation. And I think all of you, or many of you, are working in the line of mitigation. We've heard about plasma and radiation treatments to help mitigate the impacts of climate change. For me, as a small single person, planting more trees, reducing carbon emissions, investing in solar and wind. And then in terms of adaptation is saying, you know what, climate change is here. And what are we going to do now to adapt to what's going on? Obviously, we want to lessen the damage, but what can we do to reduce our impacts currently? So in terms of farmers, it's adjusting crop plans to crops that are going to be more sustainable through climate change, investing in infrastructure, whether it's wells or irrigation systems, and new infrastructure, such as buying different types of greenhouses. So today, that is what I'm going to talk about, is adaptation. And I want to talk to you about adaptation in the context of two farms that I worked with. The first farm that I wanted to share with you is B-Side Flower Farm, and they're based in Oregon. And I know we have a scientist here from Oregon too. So B-Side Flower Farm, the first time she experienced climate change was in October of 2017. And this is actually when her farm was in Northern California. And she grows flowers and dahlias, and she had expected her dahlia plantings to last through the end of November. And on October 9th, there were wildfires in Sonoma County where she lived, and there was also a frost, which is unheard of in that region. So she had to leave her farm, evacuate. She had to turn off the irrigation system, because with wildfires, you have to turn off the electricity. And she had to leave the farm. She couldn't manage it. And when she returned the next day, her crops had died between the frost overnight and the ash from the fires. She had lost her dahlia harvest. So she's thinking about, what can she do? Dahlias are really expensive, and how can she manage risk better, knowing that the wildfires are coming sooner? She thought about adjusting her plantings to plant them sooner to avoid the wildfires, but unfortunately, with her other crops, she had to plant her dahlias when she could plant them. So we did some scenario planning. We did some financial modeling. What would it look like if she planted her dahlia harvest at her normal time? And we plotted out 3 scenarios. One was complete failure. She lost her entire crop because of, an early frost or a drought. We modeled mild success, so she was able to get half of her harvest. And we modeled wild success, that she got her full harvest and was able to earn the full revenue potential. So regardless of the outcome, she was going to have a $3,000 outlay in terms of plantings and the dahlia tubers and the labor and whatnot to get the plants in the ground. And then if she had a mild success, she would have additional post-handling costs of $500. And if she had a wild success, she would have $1,000 of additional expenses. On the plus side, if she had a mild success and she was able to get half of her crop, she would get $7,000 in revenue. And if she had wild success, she would get $14,000 in revenue based on $2 a stem and either 3 to 7 stems per plant, depending on the success factors. So we were looking at 3 different scenarios for her harvest, for her planting. And if she had a complete failure, she was going to be out $3,000. So we had to sort of think about, number one, what's the outcome of the 3 different scenarios? And then the second is, what's the probability of the 3 different scenarios? So again, we're estimating the probability, but based on our estimates, we figured that 2 years out of 5, she would have complete failure. 2 years out of 5, she would have a mild success. And the 5th year, she would have a wild success. So on average, she had a potential revenue over 5 years of $11,000 or $2,000 per year. So this gave her the information that she could then make a decision. And the first decision is, can she withstand a total loss of $3,000? So if she has the total failure in 1 year, is losing $3,000 going to sink her farm? Is she going to, is that enough to wipe her out? And if she can withstand a loss of $3,000, is $2,200 a year enough in contribution to the overall profitability of the farm to make it worthwhile? The secondary analysis that I don't want to get into today, because I have a very limited window of time, is, how many hours are invested. So it's not just the $2,200 that contributes to the bottom line, but how many hours is it going to take her to earn that profit, that contribution? And it's what I call profit per hour. And she may be able to do other options that may be more profitable on a time basis. And then finally, what is the farmer's risk tolerance? And I can tell you, I have no risk tolerance whatsoever. Farmers are risky inherently by nature because you don't go into farming if you're afraid of risk. But you also have to decide your risk tolerance to gamble with your money, since that's what farmers are doing with these potentials. The second farm I worked with is Arrowwood Farm. And this story happened in March of this year. And I've been working with them over the last 5 years. And every year there's a weather event. There's a hurricane, there's a snowstorm, there's strong winds. And every year it seems they have an issue with their greenhouse. And, they lose their greenhouse. And this year in March, they were prepared for a horrible, no, go back. I'm giving away the story. I thought my next slide was a different picture. But what happened is in March, they had the storm coming. They had just planted all of their seeds for their summer and spring crops. They had about $7,000 worth of seeds in the greenhouse, and they were about to lose their power and the greenhouse may collapse. So they had the potential of lost revenue or lost expenses just of $7,000. So what they did is they brought in all their crew and they moved all the seeds, 72 flats of seeds, and they took them in their cars and they brought them to everybody's houses where they had wood-fired stoves. So if they lost the power that they would still have their crop, because if they lost everything in March, that's it for the year. So they didn't want to lose their entire crop. So the financial impact for this farm was, they had 70 trays, which was about 5,000 plants, which had a potential revenue of about $40,000. In a normal year, they're going to have some loss in the seed propagation. So in a normal year, they might lose $2,000 worth of revenue. But with the storm and the impact of the moving around of all the seed trays, they had a potential loss of $10,000. In a normal year, they would have a revenue potential of $38,000. In a storm year, they would have a revenue potential of $30,000. And the difference would be a net loss of $8,000 in lost crops, lost seeds. So the total financial impact of this snowstorm, one snowstorm, the potential impact, they have the direct expenses of all the seeds, the soil, the trays. They have the labor of planting everything. They also have the storm labor. So they had to pay their staff to move all the seed trays out of the greenhouse and to their homes, and then move the trays back to the greenhouse after the storm was over. Obviously, they had the repairs. That, on top of the potential loss of revenue, this storm cost them $9,500 from one storm. And this is the impact of climate change. So they need to consider the alternatives for their farm business. So the alternative for them, so the alternative for them is to be purchasing a polycarbonate greenhouse, which is a more stable structure than the typical greenhouses that the small scale farmers that I work with typically have. They usually have the plastic film, but a polycarbonate greenhouse is going to be more structurally sound, better able to withstand the storms, the wind, the snow. They're expensive. A typical greenhouse is maybe $12,000, and you replace the plastic film every few years. A polycarbonate greenhouse is going to be $35,000 minimum plus installation. So a lot of farmers don't have that kind of cash lying around. So they now have to finance that purchase, which brings on its own level of risk. So we modeled what it would look like to finance the purchase of total annual payments would be $7,000 to finance this purchase. So the numbers don't give an answer, but the numbers give you options, and that they can now weigh the options that make the most sense for them. If they stick with the current situation, they have a higher risk. They also have a potential loss of $9,500. If they purchase the greenhouse, then they have a lower risk, but they have $7,000 in annual costs. God willing, we don't have these storms every year. So, we could sort of weigh out which scenario would work better for them. So again, the numbers aren't the answer, but they provide options to think about, things to consider. And the first question is, can this farmer even get a loan? And that's a big challenge for a lot of the farmers I work with. Yeah, that's great if you can get the loan and the numbers work out, but if you can't get the loan, then the deal is off the table. And then the second question is, how important is peace of mind? It may be financially better to stick with the current greenhouse situation. They may lose less. They may overall have a higher profit. However, there's that pain and that agita that comes with knowing that you're going to lose your entire crop, and your peace of mind may be worth $2,500 a year instead of sticking with the current situation. So it goes with your risk tolerance, your peace of mind, and your capacity to borrow money. So in summary, to assess risk, you need to understand the numbers, and it helps to map out 2 or 3 scenarios. In the case of B-Side Farm, I did, worst case, best case, and likely case. And then you can map out the numbers. It's good to assess your risk tolerance and how comfortable you are borrowing money with the uncertainty of weather. And then, can you withstand the worst case scenario? Because the worst case scenario won't necessarily happen every year, but will it happen some years? And are you in a position to weather that risk as well? So I did want to share with you what they decided. So Lenny from B-Side Farm decided that she could withstand the risk of the dahlias after we did that analysis. So she's continuing with her usual pattern of dahlia plantings with understanding that she is going to lose some in many years. Arrowwood Farm is just coming off of their growing season right now. So they understand that they have these options, but at the end of September, their brain is still full from the primary growing season. So they're planning to take this winter to assess what they're going to do. So I think I do have a few moments to, what? Do I have a few minutes for questions?